and I signed a football scholarship to come to North Texas State University. And I was told to come here because North Texas was famous for basketball. And we were famous for beautiful women. Don't ask me how, but that's what we were known for. We were known as a party school, and we were known as the best music program in the state of Texas. And once I arrived as a freshman, I found that all of these were true. That in basketball, we never lost a game at home. We played in what was called the Snake Pit. Many of you remember that. And we couldn't be beat on our own property. We produced 2 Miss Americas and 1 Miss Texas during my time here. So we had beautiful women. And it was indeed a party school, so I was told. And I found out that indeed our music school at North Texas State was great. Our football team, in the years I was here, we only won about 7 games in my 4 years. We weren't real good, but we would always tell people, you might beat us, but our band is about to whomp you bad. We were going to win halftime, no matter how they beat us. I didn't care whether you were Texas or Notre Dame, our band would beat yours every time. And I discovered during my time here that we had not merely a music program that was great, but we had what was held to be the best jazz program in the United States. That we had, I came to find out, jazz bands, and that was altogether new to me, lab school bands. And there were about 9 of them, where you had to, just like in football, you had to compete for a spot. And if you won that spot, then you had to compete to hold it, because there was such a standard. And generally, when you met some student that was from the 4 corners of the United States, that you just simply had to ask them, what's your instrument? Because if they came that far away, like Charles from California, that they were a jazz musician. And people would come just to hear them rehearse. Nobody would come to watch us practice in football, but they would come to watch these guys rehearse. And I never heard of anybody going to listen to people rehearse. But you'd go over to the quads and you would listen to the 2 o'clock and the 3 o'clock and the 4 o'clock, and you would listen to what was the brass ring of all of the jazz department. It was the ultimate point on a resume, and that was the 1 o'clock. And there was a name that was always pronounced over these jazz bands and over all the jazz department, and it was kind of like the Pope, and it was the name Breeden. There was never a first name with it. It was just Breeden. And one name identified who it was. It was kind of like Voltaire or Charlemagne. You just said Breeden, and everybody knew who that was. I was converted to Christ in 1972. And Denton Bible was started in 1976, and I came here in 1977. And it seemed like our initial constituency of church members was a huge amount of college students, and particularly musicians, and particularly jazz musicians. Now, why they would come to hear a football player preach, I'm not sure, but they did. And once again, with all of these jazz musicians, that I heard that name. It was ubiquitous, of Breeden. And so one day I decided, about 1978, that I was going to go see this mythic individual. And so I went over to the quads, and I was going to watch the 1 o'clock practice. And I found out by this time that he had a first name, that he was Leon Breeden. And I always felt that was the perfect name for a guy that directed a jazz program, was Leon. That was just kind of a hip kind of a name. And of course, this was in the 70s, so I was looking for a guy that typified Leon. I didn't know what he looked like. And so I was looking for this kind of beatnik-looking individual. A guy with maybe a little goatee and smoking strange, long French cigarettes, reading John Paul Sartre. this existentialist leading the music program, Breeden. And I got there, and I sat there where they practiced, and I looked, because there were a lot of those kind of people standing around, as to which one of them was Breeden. And so I asked somebody, I said, which one of these guys is Leon Breeden? And he waited, and he said, that's him. And I remember thinking, this is an old fellow. That Leon died at 88. My mother is 86. He's older than my mother. And I just looked at him and I thought to myself, I'm not sure what a head of a jazz department looks like. But he looks kind of like a whole life salesman. Maybe a lobbyist down in Austin. He had this thick black shock of curly hair, just like my father did, with a little steel gray in it. It was swept back. And he had one of those short sleeve white shirts that old guys wore. And he was kind of thick, and kind of hairy forearms, and kind of walked bow-legged, if you remember, just a little bit. And he wasn't from New Orleans. This guy was from Wichita Falls, of all places. I said, that's Breeden. And I sat there, and he stepped to the music stand. And he did one of these, and then you could see that this guy was born to lead. That you could tell this was his band, this was his program, and he was in charge. He was like a teamster, and these were his mules right here. And he was handling them. And I just watched him. He never raised his voice. He never spoke in an unkind way. He would stop. He would speak incisively to what needed to be done. He would direct here and there. He would snap his fingers, and they would start again. They finished right on time. He just led by the sheer presence of who he was. And I could tell nobody wanted to disappoint Breeden. And one day, a few months, a year or so afterwards, I picked up an annual, the Yucca from North Texas. And I was leafing through it, and I saw they had a section on notable professors. And one of them was Leon Breeden. And shortly thereafter, his wife passed away. And my wife took a casserole down to him and came back, and she said she did. And I said, you spoke to Breeden? She said, yeah. He said, you shook my hand. I said, you touched him? He said, you have a conversation? I said, yeah. He wouldn't let me go. We stayed there. He was just effusive, thanking me for bringing the casserole. I said, really? And shortly thereafter, he married his grade school sweetheart from Wichita Falls, Benny Wayne. And now they lived 3 houses down. And Benny Wayne, they were going to a Lutheran church down in Flower Mountain. And Benny Wayne, with that marvelous bit of wisdom that she had, she said, Leon, do we know any of these people down in Flower Mountain? And he said, no, we don't. She said, why don't we go to a church up here where we don't know anybody? Leon said, Eureka. So, we had a number of musicians at our church, and particularly Paris Rutherford. He said, well, that's a church where Paris goes, and where that woman of that pastor brought me a casserole. And so, I looked up, and one Sunday, there he was. There was Leon Breeden. And I began a relationship with Breeden. A lot of times, very famous guys don't like to talk about the areas of their fame. Leon was different. And we made a great combo because I love history and Leon lived it and he loved to talk about it. And so I would go down to his house. If you ever were in his house, it was like a real neat attic. all of his vinyls and all of his arrangements and everything was a little bit of his life. And so he just kept it with all of his pictures. And so I would go down there and sit with him and Benny Wayne. And I would just throw out a name. I would say, Leon, Frank Sinatra. Ah, Frank Sinatra. And he would take off. Ella Fitzgerald. Benny Goodman. Gene Krupa. Did you know Louis Armstrong? Did you know Stan Kenton? Dave Breeden. And I, as the unwashed, would just ask questions to him. And Leon was delighted just to catch me up on jazz history and about these fellows. And so we had marvelous times. He served in our church. People loved to hear him play the clarinet. And so he was a favorite at funerals. Now, would the internationally known head of a jazz school be willing to play on demand for a family at a funeral? He was delighted to. And he would play well because he did it, he felt, for God who gave him his talent.